were talking about sex differences, and you mentioned there's not a lot of evidence for sort of adjusting the exercise prescription for different phases of the menstrual cycle, but there are some legitimate sex differences between men and women. Are those sex differences big enough such that this hybrid training program we're talking about, resistance training, some high intensity interval training, cardio, and then some steady state cardio would look different? And if so, how would they look different to the training that a man would do?
Yeah. So the one thing I always like to emphasize is that women aren't men, but women aren't a different species. So when we think about exercise training and adaptation and the mechanisms that just drive the responses to training, they're going to be very similar. So it's not that we're going to have these like massively distinctly different training programs, but there are some sex differences when it comes to physiology that might inform different things that we think about with our training. And so, you know, the first being that when it comes to resistance training, you know, like I alluded to this earlier, I mentioned it, that, you know, females and males respond very similarly to progressive training interventions and training programs and all of this stuff, and have that same relative potential. The one thing there is that there's potentially the ability for females to train at a higher percent of their 1 rep max, or they might have like, you might be able to do like, I don't know, 5 reps at 85% or 90% of your 1 rep max, but your 1 rep max might then not be as high as it might be predicted on like a 1 rep max calculator due to like a little bit of neuromuscular inefficiency that we see there, just a little bit of differences there. But part of that is also, you know, females are very fat oxidative and more oxidative in nature, and potentially have more type 1 muscle fibers, and have better essentially muscular endurance or endurance by nature across the board with that, with the caveat of like, you don't just come out trained. I really like to emphasize that. Like, there are very big training differences that we see with females.
But you have more potential for building endurance capacity, whereas men would have more potential for speed and power.
Males are more glycolytic. They use more carbohydrate during exercise training. They're more, you know, potentially, you know, well, they're more powerful, and they can produce more force in their muscle because of their sex differences in testosterone and that exposure to the muscle cell. But, you know, that doesn't mean that we can't adapt. Estrogen itself also is a hormone that encourages strength and hypertrophy.
It's anabolic.
It is. Estrogen is anabolic. It is. And so that is why when we see some of this data that, again, isn't like super concrete, it's a little messy, that is early with some of the menstrual cycle stuff, there's maybe a benefit for strength or hypertrophy when estrogen is high. Or
that's the late follicular phase.
Late follicular phase into ovulation. And that's also why you see with mixed oral contraceptives that have a steady dose of estrogen, you actually see potentially more muscle gain or not blunted muscle gain because of that exposure to estrogen is kind of the thought process of why that's there. And so,
but that's just measuring when someone is at their strongest, right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily measuring, does strength training at that time lead to better long-term performance or strength?
Yes.
Because it could be that even though you're not as strong in different parts of your cycle,
you can still make progress. Yes.
You can make progress.
We have a few training interventions, but none of them are like very good. Like the best one we had still, the individuals were training themselves, and the data ends up being like really non-significant across the cycle when you remove birth control users from the study. And then there's a pilot study that was okay. And we have a few single limb studies, and like those have like kind of, they're great because that person is the control and there's crossover, but the 3 or 4 of those, like it's like 50-50 on if we saw positive adaptations in different components of either cross-sectional area or strength output. So like the idea and thought right now is there might be some potential benefit to being more hypertrophy or strength focused when estrogen is higher. And my take on that is, okay, that might be there. We might need more data to say that. But like, if again, autoregulation, if you feel better in your follicular phase or ovulation phase or whatever that looks like in your training, and you can up your weights or your volume because you feel good and you're recovering, then that's fine. Go ahead, do that, right? In contrast of when you might feel poor otherwise. But, you know, to circle back to that point there, I think people think that, you know, females can't gain muscle or get strong because they don't have testosterone, and that's not true. Estrogen is very, it's kind of our superpower hormone, and that's why you see this stark contrast with menopause of where we see, this insensitivity to protein or more protein breakdown or muscle loss or shifts in body composition, and a lot of that comes from that loss of estrogen. That's not to say that peri and postmenopausal individuals suddenly can't be strong or gain muscle or get strength. People can get stronger as in old age with training exposure. But all that to say that it's we're not getting stronger or adapting or responding to exercise training programs because we have lower volumes of testosterone or because we have estrogen. And so with that being said, we might be able to do more reps at higher percentages of our 1 rep max, or potentially just be better at volume in that sense in the gym and training. And again, this is me very speaking we don't have this super concrete absolute evidence of this stuff, but I'm okay with saying, yeah, you might be able to handle more volume or be able to do more weight on your high volume sets than maybe potentially your male counterparts in training. And I've seen this in myself when I'm doing very strength heavy squat cycles. I can just crush through volume on my training of high reps and sets in ways that I think that my male coach is I can't do that similarly.
They're getting fatigued sooner.
Yeah, they're getting fatigued sooner. We have more of that oxidative phenotype, oxygen using phenotype, more type 1 muscle fibers. But on the contrary with that, so with resistance training, I don't think programs need to look that different. I think that what most, females are doing for resistance training is kind of not the best.
Unpack that.
I think they do a lot of garbage training programs. I think they do a lot of, we talked about a little bit earlier, where they're doing 8 to 10 exercises, and they're all 4 to 10 to 12 reps, and they're not super specific, and they're not
different muscle groups.
Yeah, they're doing a leg day that is 6 hamstring exercises in a row. The very classic Instagram Fitspo workout, or they're doing the group fitness classes where they're just doing a cardio workout essentially like that. Or they're just doing that going through the motions, underloaded stuff. Or they're just doing too many things in their training sessions rather than pulling back and having it be specific of either, whether it's body splits or specific splits across the week, depending on what they're training for.